In 1982, Paramount Pictures released Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan. Despite carrying a considerably lower budget than its predecessor, the film was a smash hit at the box office, grossing $78 million domestically, good enough to make it the 6th highest grossing movie of the year. A sequel at this point was a given, but the question remained, would Mr. Spock be involved? After all, Leonard Nimoy had been outspoken for years about wanting to move away from the role, even writing a memoir called I'm Not Spock.
The full Leonard Nimoy cycle. I am not Spock, then I am Spock, and finally, I am also Scotty.
He was killed off in Star Trek II, but a last-minute insert showing him doing a mind meld with Dr. McCoy teased that perhaps Spock wasn't quite as dead as he seemed. Indeed, Star Trek III: The Search for Spock would hit theaters in 1984 and would be directed by Leonard Nimoy himself, with the film launching a very successful career for the actor behind the camera. So how did it all happen? Shortly after Star Trek II came out, Leonard Nimoy was approached by Paramount Pictures about being in a potential third film, and he said yes, on the condition that he be allowed to direct.
Yes. Yes, Spock.
While this may seem like a somewhat outrageous request, Nimoy had actually directed plenty of TV by this point, including 2 episodes of William Shatner's T.J. Hooker, including a very well-received installment he also starred in called Vengeance is Mine, that featured him as a father hell-bent on murdering his daughter's rapist.
And if he does, you have yourself to thank for it. This is wrong, Paul. Dead wrong.
Everything you're doing is getting in my way, Hooker.
Everyone, including Shatner, was on board with Nimoy being behind the camera, except perhaps the one person who really mattered, studio head Michael Eisner, who believed Nimoy hated Star Trek and had demanded to be killed off.
Certainly, sir. How else can I keep my reputation as a miracle worker?
Nimoy had to convince him that this wasn't actually the case, and that he would be committed to the franchise going forward before getting the opportunity to direct. Perhaps conscious of the fact that the last film had only really been a smash in North America, the budget was still kept relatively low, with it costing $16 million compared to the last movie's $12 million.
How are we doing?
USS Enterprise.
Are we doing?
Respond, please.
Funny you should put it quite that way, Jim.
The effects were considerably better this time for a myriad of reasons, but the most important was that they were able to reuse sets and uniforms from The Wrath of Khan, allowing Industrial Light and Magic, ILM, to create some truly memorable sequences, such as the climactic explosion of the USS Enterprise.
My God, Bones. What have I done?
In the end, writer-producer Harvey Bennett was able to use a relatively simple device to bring Spock back. We learn that Spock transferred his essence, his Katra, over to McCoy. His body is still on the new planet Genesis, so Kirk, McCoy, Sulu, Scotty, and Chekhov, with an assist from Uhura, are forced to hijack the Enterprise to return to the now forbidden planet.
The word, sir? The word is no. I am therefore going anyway. You can count on our help, sir. Thank you, Mr. Sulu. I'll need it.
Meanwhile, Kirk's son David, once again played by Merritt Buttrick, along with the last film's breakout character Saavik, who was recast after Kirstie Alley bailed with Robin Curtis, is sent along to the Genesis planet to discover a mysterious life form that actually turns out to be Spock. His body has been rejuvenated by the Genesis effect, but the planet is dangerously unstable due to David's shortcuts, and Spock's body ages from being a baby to adulthood in days.
The hell is going on down there?
Meanwhile, a rogue Klingon commander, Krug, discovers the Genesis secret and wants it for the Klingon Empire. All 3 groups collide for a showdown on Genesis, one which will forever change the franchise's greatest hero, James T. Kirk.
You fool, look around you! The planet's destroying itself!
Yes, exhilarating, isn't it?
Now here's the thing, Star Trek III: The Search for Spock is the second installment of a loose trilogy made up of the second, third, and fourth films, with the 6th serving as kind of an epilogue. You could call it the Genesis trilogy, but I tend to view it as the Kirk saga. His arc in the films really gives the whole series one of its major thoroughline.
Sorry about your crew, but as we say on Earth, c'est la vie.
In Star Trek II, Kirk is in a midlife crisis, and indeed by the time the film ends, he's lost his best friend but gained a son. The third film would reverse that, as he's able to get his best friend back, but in the process loses his son. It changes the formerly kind and heroic Kirk into a much more cynical, bitter captain, something which only really pays off in the 6th film and is all but ignored by the 5th. He hates Klingons, he blames them for the death of his son, and when he learns that the entire race is on the verge of being killed off, his answer is simply,
Let them die.
It's a dark side of the character that I don't think any other Star Trek series ever really explored. Thus, the third film is a very important one for William Shatner, as for the first time, Kirk loses, and loses big. Indeed, the movie ends with the destruction of the USS Enterprise, something which no doubt hit fans pretty hard in 1984. But the fact that Kirk's rescue of Spock comes at so high a cost makes this perhaps the most underrated, thrilling installment of the series. Nimoy, despite it only being his first go as a feature director, made a pretty good film. It's not as well crafted as the second, but he keeps the pace moving along nicely.
A solar eclipse. The cosmic ballet goes on.
Does anyone want to switch seats?
It's also the shortest film in the franchise, but only by a minute, and shows his flair for directing action. Indeed, the movie has one of Kirk's most memorable scenes, as at the end of the film he's trapped on Genesis with the movie's villain, Christopher Lloyd's Krug, and the two go head-to-head in a battle to the death. While people may mock Shatner's
I have had enough of you!
one-liner, as kids we used to say it over and over again because, well, we thought it was cool. One of the best things about Star Trek 3 is the cast. Shatner gets to do some of his best acting here, especially when he realizes that his son's been murdered. Watch him as he tries to hit the captain's chair but misses. DeForest Kelley gets his best Trek part to date, with McCoy on the verge of insanity for much of the film as he simply can't handle Spock's katra.
Climb the steps, Jim. Climb the steps of Mount Seleia.
With Nimoy sidelined, McCoy becomes Kirk's number 2, and he seems to relish the bigger role. Scotty and Chekhov don't get a ton to do, but Sulu and Uhura both have nice moments. Sulu even uses a couple of judo moves on a hulking security guard who makes the mistake of calling him tiny.
Don't call me tiny.
While Uhura hijacks the transporters for a lovable crew.
This isn't reality. This is fantasy. You wanted Adventure House this.
Best of all is Christopher Lloyd as the villain, Krug.
Good. It's just a turn of luck I have been waiting for.
His casting must have been seen as pretty wild in 1984. He hadn't played Doc Brown in Back to the Future yet, and he was mostly known as the permanently stoned Reverend Jim on Taxi. He was so good in the part one wonders that maybe Robert Zemeckis and Steven Spielberg might have actually seen this when they were casting Doc in Back to the Future.
Oh, great Scott!
One thing that's also kind of interesting is that John LaRoquette, who everyone will remember as the iconic Dan Fielding on Night Court, plays Krug's second-in-command, Maltz.
Help us or die.
I do not deserve to live.
Fine, I'll kill you later.
When the movie was being shot, the show hadn't actually premiered on television yet, so he was still kind of a nobody, but by the time it came out, people actually knew who he was, so his role was kind of a treat. It's only a small role, but Maltz does come off as somewhat remorseful towards the end. My only issue is that because of all the other Klingons are dead at this point, why weren't Saavik, Scotty, Chekhov, and Sulu not able to take over the Klingon bird of prey once they beamed up? If the only one they actually had to deal with was Maltz. Does Kirk really have to do everything? The only place where the cast comes up short a little bit in my opinion is Robin Curtis. It's not that she's awful as Saavik, it's just that, well, Kirstie Alley was really iconic in the part, and one wishes that she had returned for the sequel.
I have no knowledge.
Then I hope pain is something you enjoy.
One person that did return, however, is James Horner, who once again composes a superb score with Nimoy justifiably raving about it in the Search for Spock special features on the DVD Blu-ray. In the end, the film was politely received by critics, many of whom compared it unfavorably to The Wrath of Khan and said it was fine, but nothing more than that. One of the folks that really didn't care for it was President Ronald Reagan, who watched it at Camp David and wrote in his journals, "It wasn't too good." Whatever, Ronald.
Yeah. What do you know, skeet face?
As a fan, this movie holds a special place in my heart. Is it predictable? Sure, but only in the fact that because the movie is called The Search for Spock, you know they're not going to end it with them saying, sorry, we simply couldn't find him. As a Trekkie, this is probably my third or fourth favorite in the series, and audiences seem to agree with me, with it making only $2 million less than The Wrath of Khan did at the domestic box office, $76.5 million, despite heavy competition from Gremlins, Ghostbusters, and Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom.
Okie dokie, Dr. Jones, hold on to your potatoes!
It was a big enough hit for Paramount that they actually opted to increase the budget by like $10 million for the next movie, which would become one of the few Trek movies to ever make a boatload of money overseas. But of course, that's a story for another time. So make sure to let us know in the comments below this video what you think of Star Trek 3. Is it, like I think, the movie that disproves the notion that only the even-numbered Trek films are good? Let us know.
I have been, and ever shall be, Your friend?
Yes. Yes, Spock.